The CEO challenged her with a riddle worth millions. The waitress solved it instantly, without emotion. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Meet Sarah Green, a young waitress working at one of the busiest restaurants in Manhattan. She had always been invisible to the wealthy patrons that walked in and out every day, a fixture of the background, but unnoticed by the powerful. She had been serving tables since she was a teenager, doing everything she could to make ends meet. Sarah was used to the dismissive glances, the condescending orders, and the occasional ungrateful tip. But she didn't mind. After all, this job was just a stepping stone. Her true passion was solving puzzles, an interest she picked up as a kid. But for now, working in a high-end restaurant was the reality she faced. One evening, everything changed. A new guest arrived. He was not just any guest. He was Alexander Ford, a billionaire tech mogul who had made his fortune by creating one of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley. Tall, handsome, and effortlessly confident, he walked in like he owned the world. His reputation for being a ruthless businessman preceded him, and everyone in the restaurant immediately knew who he was. Sarah, as usual, didn't pay him much attention. She was used to serving important people. But what happened next was nothing like anything she had experienced before. Alexander settled into a corner booth, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the practiced gaze of a man who had seen it all. When Sarah came to take his order, he looked up at her, sizing her up as he did everyone around him. "I'll have the lobster bisque, rare steak, and a glass of your finest red wine," he said, his tone dismissive. Sarah nodded, writing down the order as she did for every customer. "Is there anything else, sir?" she asked politely. He paused, his eyes glinting with a challenge. "Actually, yes," he said with a smirk. "If you can solve a riddle, I'll give you $1 million. Sarah, who had seen her fair share of challenges from bored rich men, raised an eyebrow but remained calm. She had heard it all before. $1 million for a riddle? She repeated. Alexander leaned forward, clearly enjoying himself. "Yes, and if you don't solve it, I'll make sure you don't get a tip for the night." Sarah's heart raced slightly, but she kept her cool. It wasn't the first time she had dealt with arrogant, rich customers. "All right, hit me with your riddle," she said with a steady voice. Alexander's grin widened as he took a deep breath, ready to deliver his challenge. "Here's the riddle. What comes once in a minute, twice in a moment, but never in 1,000 years?" Sarah looked at him for a moment, her expression unchanged. Without missing a beat, she replied, "The letter M." Alexander's eyes widened, and for the briefest moment, his confident demeanor cracked. You solved it?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Sarah nodded, her calmness unnerving him even more. "It's a simple riddle, sir. But sometimes the simplest answers are the hardest to see." Alexander sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He had thrown the riddle at her thinking it would be impossible for someone like her to solve, but she had done it instantly, without a hint of hesitation. I can't believe it," he muttered under his breath. Sarah simply smiled, her eyes never leaving his. "That'll be $1 million, right?" she said, her voice cool, but with a hint of amusement. Alexander blinked, his initial shock fading as he regained his composure. "You don't expect me to actually pay, do you?" he asked, his tone now defensive. But Sarah was unfazed. "Well, you did offer it," she said calmly, standing her ground. Alexander thought for a moment, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a check. "You're the first person to ever catch me off guard like that," he said, writing out a check for $1 million. "But I think I underestimated you, Sarah. I'll give you the million, but I'll also be watching you. You might just have a future working for me." Sarah took the check, still unflinching, and replied, "I don't need your money or your offer. But I'll take the $1 million and use it to make a difference in my own way." As she walked away, Alexander sat in stunned silence, realizing that the woman he had tried to dismiss had just shown him that sometimes the real power is in being underestimated. I will never forget the look in Alexander's eyes as he handed me that check. He was still in disbelief, as though I had just shattered every assumption he had made about me. As I walked back to the kitchen, I tucked the check into my apron pocket, but I couldn't help feeling a small rush of triumph. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving something that I had known all along, that intelligence and talent don't always look the way people expect them to. Later that evening, the same CEO, now a little humbled, sat alone in his booth, but this time, he wasn't checking his phone or making deals. His mind seemed miles away, lost in thought. He glanced up when I approached his table, but instead of the smugness I had seen earlier, I saw something different. Curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than before. "Can we talk?" I nodded, placing his plate in front of him. He motioned to the seat across from him. "Sit," he said, but this time, there was no command in his voice. Just a request. I hesitated. I had done my job, and I was getting ready to walk away, but something in the way he looked at me made me pause. I pulled out the chair and sat down. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, professional. I wasn't about to let him throw me off track. He leaned back in the booth, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes studying me with an intensity that almost felt uncomfortable. "You surprised me today," he said, breaking the silence. "I didn't expect you to answer the riddle, let alone solve it instantly." I raised an eyebrow. "I told you it was simple. You were looking for a complicated answer when the solution was right in front of you." He nodded slowly, as if processing something. "Yeah, I get that now. But there's something else about you. You don't act like the others. Most people, when they see me, they either get intimidated or try to impress me. But you just were. You didn't try to be anything other than who you are." I felt a small spark of something, but I didn't let it show. I had worked hard to get to this point. No one, not even a CEO with billions, was going to get under my skin. "I am who I am," I replied simply. "And if that bothers you, then maybe I'm not the one you should be talking to." For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. His sharp, calculating exterior cracked, just a little. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't mean to offend you. That's just how I've always been. Calculating, testing people, trying to figure out who they are. But you don't let me." I shrugged. "I don't play games. I answer questions, and I do my job. That's all." His eyes narrowed slightly, as though he were still trying to figure me out. "I think you're more than that," he said, his voice lower now. "And I think you could be very useful to me." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "What does that even mean?" I asked, leaning forward just slightly. He smiled a little, but there was no arrogance behind it. "I run a multi-billion-dollar company," he began, "but I need someone who can think outside the box. Someone who doesn't get lost in the details, who doesn't get bogged down by the usual rules of business. I could use someone like you." My mind raced, but I kept my face neutral. I knew exactly where this was going. He was trying to recruit me, trying to turn this moment into something more. But I wasn't some office drone he could buy with a paycheck. "You don't even know me," I said, keeping my tone even. "I don't know if I want to work for someone like you." His expression hardened slightly. "I don't make offers I don't intend to keep," he said, his voice suddenly colder. "And I never ask people to work for me unless I'm certain they have what it takes." I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air between us, but I wasn't ready to bite. "Not yet. And why would I want to work for you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because you solved that riddle. And I think you could solve a lot more problems for me. Bigger ones." I stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. Finally, I spoke. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up. "But no promises." I walked away, the weight of the check still in my pocket, and the weight of the offer still in my mind. Alexander Ford wasn't just a billionaire businessman. He was a man who saw something in me that I hadn't even seen in myself. As I stepped into the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. But what I didn't know then was how quickly everything was going to change. I walked out of the restaurant that night feeling a mix of excitement and unease. The check for $1 million was still tucked inside my apron, but it wasn't the money that lingered in my mind. It was Alexander Ford's offer. I had never expected anything like it. A billionaire CEO, known for his ruthless business practices, had seen something in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself. But I wasn't ready to let him off the hook that easily. I had been underestimated my entire life, and I had no intention of letting anyone, especially someone like him, take advantage of me. As I walked the streets of Manhattan, the city that never stopped moving, I couldn't help but think about what Alexander had said. You could be very useful to me. I had heard that line before. People always said I had potential, but it never meant anything. Not until now. But how could I trust him? How could I trust someone who had spent his life making deals, crushing his competitors, and building an empire? I wasn't a pawn in his game. I was my own person, and I would make my own decisions. The next day, I went to work with the check still in my pocket. The regulars came in, sat down, and ordered their usuals. Nothing felt different, except for the weight of the offer hanging over me. As I set down a coffee cup for a customer, I caught sight of him. Alexander Ford. He was sitting at a corner table, looking at his phone, surrounded by a few associates. His usual confident demeanor was gone. He looked almost lost. I told myself not to care, but something in me couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking. Had he really meant what he said the night before, or was it just a fleeting offer to make himself feel better? As I made my way over to him, I felt my heart race. "Good morning, Mr. Ford," I said, my voice steady despite the tension. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Sarah," he said, his tone softer than before. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I'd like to discuss that offer again. But this time, I want to be clear. I need someone like you on my team. Someone who sees things differently, who isn't afraid to challenge the norm." I hesitated for a moment, taking in his words. Was this just another attempt to manipulate me, or did he really mean it? "I don't know what you're asking for," I replied, trying to stay calm. "You want me to work for you? But why me? I'm just a waitress." Alexander leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "Because you're not just a waitress," he said, his voice firm. "You're someone who isn't afraid to think for herself. You solved my riddle, Sarah, but more than that, you showed me that there's more to you than meets the eye. I need someone like that. Someone who doesn't just take orders, but can help me solve problems that no one else can." I felt a flicker of something inside me. It wasn't just the words he said, but the way he said them. There was no arrogance in his tone, no hidden agenda. For the first time, I saw a side of him that was vulnerable. But I still wasn't sure. I had learned not to trust people easily, especially those with power. "What exactly would you want me to do?" I asked, my voice guarded. Alexander smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I need someone who can help me see the bigger picture. Someone who can take on challenges that my team isn't equipped to handle. Your skills, your way of thinking, are what I need. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than just serving tables. A chance to make an impact." I looked at him, really looked at him. This was no longer just about the money. It was about something deeper, something that I hadn't even realized I wanted until now. But I still had doubts. "And if I say no?" I asked, my voice steady. Alexander's expression softened. "If you say no, I'll respect that. But I don't think you will. Not after everything we've discussed. You're more than just a waitress, Sarah. You've already proven that." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. This wasn't just about a job. It was about my future, about what I wanted to do with my life. And for the first time, I realized that I had a choice. I didn't have to be invisible anymore. I didn't have to settle for the life I had. I could choose something more. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up. "But no promises." Alexander nodded, his eyes still locked on mine. "Take your time, Sarah. But know this. I'm offering you an opportunity that won't come again." As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope stirring inside me. Could this really be the beginning of something bigger? Could I really make a difference? I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my own destiny. I spent the next few days thinking about Alexander's offer. Every time I walked into the restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the way the world around me seemed so small. The bustling city outside, the busy diners inside. It all felt distant, as if I was observing someone else's life. Alexander's words echoed in my mind. "You're more than just a waitress." But what did that really mean? Could I really leave this life behind and step into something bigger, something that scared me in ways I hadn't yet fully understood? It was the kind of question that kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling in my tiny apartment. But every time I picked up that check for $1 million, it felt like a constant reminder that I had a chance to change. Still, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in the back of my mind. People like Alexander didn't offer opportunities for free. There had to be a catch, and I wasn't ready to dive into something I couldn't control. On the fourth day after our meeting, I found myself walking back into the restaurant, my thoughts consumed with the decision that loomed over me. I was standing at the counter, folding napkins when I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Sarah. Alexander's voice was smooth, yet there was an underlying urgency to it. I turned, meeting his gaze. I've been thinking about you. About your decision. He was standing just a few feet away, his posture commanding yet unthreatening. I need you to understand something, he continued, his voice low. I'm not asking for a simple favor. What I'm offering you is a chance to make a real impact, not just on my company, but on something bigger. I'm offering you a seat at the table with people who shape the future, people who change the world. His words were powerful, but they didn't have the same effect on me as they had the first time. I had heard promises before, from men who saw me as nothing more than a tool to use, a means to an end. And what makes you think I'm interested in all of that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What's in it for me? Alexander stepped closer, his eyes not leaving mine. What's in it for you? He repeated, his lips curling into a faint smile. It's the chance to stop being invisible. To stop playing it safe, Sarah. You've been playing it safe your whole life, but you're more than that. You're smarter than you think, and you've got the ability to do things others can't even dream of. His words stirred something in me, but I held back. And what do you want from me in return? I asked, crossing my arms. A little bit of trust, he said, his voice steady. I want you to believe in yourself the way I do. Trust that I'm offering you something worth fighting for. I didn't respond immediately. The thought of stepping into a world I had never known, of working alongside people who held the power to make decisions that shaped economies, was both thrilling and terrifying. I'm not like you, I finally said, my voice quiet. I don't come from the same world. I don't know if I belong in yours. Alexander's expression softened. I know you're not like me, Sarah, and that's why I need you. People like me have all the answers. But we need someone like you, someone who sees things differently, someone who isn't afraid to ask the questions we're too comfortable to ask. There was a long pause as I absorbed his words. For the first time since we had met, I felt like he wasn't just speaking to convince me. He was speaking to connect. I don't know if I'm ready, I said finally, but I'll give you an answer soon. I need to think about it. Alexander didn't push me further. Instead, he nodded, as if he had expected this response. Take your time, he said, his voice softer now. I'm not going anywhere. And when you're ready, you'll know. As he turned to leave, I couldn't help but watch him walk away. There was something in his words that had reached me, something I couldn't quite explain. I had never thought of myself as someone who could make an impact. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had been playing it safe for far too long. The decision wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into that world. But as I watched Alexander leave the restaurant that day, I knew one thing for sure. My life, the way it had always been, was about to change forever. It was just a matter of whether I was brave enough to take that first step. I took a deep breath as I sat on the edge of my bed that night, the $1 million check lying on my dresser, the same check that had once seemed like a dream, but now felt more like a decision I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The night was still, and in the silence of my small apartment, I couldn't help but replay the last few days in my mind. Alexander Ford, the billionaire CEO, had offered me a life I never imagined. I had always been content working at the restaurant, keeping my head down and doing what I knew best. But Alexander's words, his offer, had shaken me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had always been a survivor, never a dreamer. But now, the question lingered. Was it time to stop playing it safe? Was it time to embrace something bigger, something that had the potential to change everything? I knew I wasn't like Alexander. I didn't come from money. I didn't have the polished confidence he exuded. But he had seen something in me, something that made him believe I could be more than I had ever allowed myself to believe. It was a chance to step out of the shadows and make an impact. It was an opportunity to prove that I was more than just the girl who served drinks and refilled plates. But what would it cost me? I couldn't just ignore the reality of my life. I had my mother's medical bills to think about, rent to pay, and a future that didn't feel very secure. Working for Alexander would mean stepping into a world that was foreign to me. It would mean leaving behind the life I had built, for better or worse. The next morning, as the sun streamed through my window, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, trying to make sense of my reflection. Was I really ready for this? The thought of leaving the restaurant behind was strange, but the idea of staying in the same place, stagnant, was even stranger. I made a decision that day. I was going to take the risk. I walked into the restaurant, my mind made up. The atmosphere felt the same, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't the same person I was a few days ago. I could feel the weight of my decision, and I knew that the next few weeks, months, maybe even years, were going to be life-changing. As I stepped into the back of the restaurant, I spotted Alexander sitting at a table near the window, his usual confident posture still intact. But today, there was something different about him. His eyes were focused, but there was an underlying vulnerability there, something I hadn't seen before. I walked over to him, my heart racing. "Mr. Ford," I said, my voice steady. "I've made my decision." He looked up at me, his expression neutral, but his eyes intense. "And?" he asked, his voice laced with anticipation. "I'm in," I said, my words firm. "I'll take the offer." A slow smile spread across his face. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something genuine in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, standing up and offering me his hand. I shook it firmly, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is just the beginning," he said. "And I want you to know, Sarah, I'm not offering this to you out of charity. I'm offering it because I believe in your potential." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the money or the job. It was about someone, for the first time in my life, seeing me as something more than what I was. He wasn't offering me a role to fill in his empire. He was offering me a chance to build something of my own. I wasn't sure exactly what that meant yet, but I knew it was something I couldn't pass up. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady, the uncertainty finally fading. Alexander nodded. "Good. I'll make sure everything is set up for you. You'll start with the project I mentioned last time. I'll have my team bring you up to speed." I felt a nervous flutter in my chest, but I didn't let it show. "I'll be ready," I said, surprising myself with my own confidence. As we talked about the details of what was to come, my mind raced. I was about to step into a world of high stakes, powerful decisions, and challenges that I couldn't even fully comprehend yet. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was excited. This wasn't just a job. It was the chance to change the direction of my life, to do something meaningful, to prove that I was capable of so much more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation, as I took the necessary steps to leave the restaurant behind and step into my new role. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was one I knew I had to make. And as I walked away from the restaurant for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to face whatever came next. I had no idea what to expect when I walked into the towering glass building of Anderson Capital. The hustle and bustle of the city outside seemed like a different world compared to the cool, sterile atmosphere inside. I had been given the address the day before, and I had spent the entire night rehearsing what I would say, how I would act, and whether I was truly ready for the world I was about to enter. The elevator ride to the 87th floor felt like it lasted an eternity. The sleek, high-rise lobby was filled with people in expensive suits, walking quickly as if they had somewhere important to be. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. I stepped off the elevator, trying my best to maintain my composure, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The receptionist looked at me with a raised eyebrow, clearly noticing my worn-out suit compared to the perfectly pressed attire of the other employees. She typed something into her computer, then looked up at me. "May I help you?" she asked with a neutral expression. "I'm here to see Mr. Ford," I replied, my voice steady but betraying the nervousness I felt. The receptionist paused, looking at her screen, and then back at me. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, clearly questioning why someone like me would be there. I didn't have an appointment, but I wasn't about to back down. "Yes," I said, my tone firm. "I have a meeting with Mr. Ford." The receptionist didn't seem convinced, but after a few more moments of typing, she nodded and gestured for me to take a seat. As I sat down, my heart raced. This was it. This was the opportunity one had been waiting for, and I couldn't afford to mess it up. I checked my watch. I was early. I glanced around the room, seeing the well-dressed professionals, their eyes focused on their phones or computer screens. No one looked at me twice. I was invisible here. I sat quietly, doing my best to control my breathing. The minutes ticked by slowly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair approached me. He was tall and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who was used to being in control. "Ms. Green," he asked, his voice deep. I stood up, my nerves making my hands shake slightly. "Yes?" I replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm Sarah Green. I'm David Mercer, Mr. Ford's chief of staff. He's expecting you." I followed David through a maze of sleek offices and open workspaces, all of which screamed success. People walked past us, their heads down, absorbed in their tasks. It was like a scene from a corporate movie, one I never thought I'd be part of. We finally reached a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. David knocked on the door before opening it. "Mr. Ford," he said, "Ms. Green is here." I stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of the room's silence. Alexander Ford was sitting behind a massive desk, his eyes focused on a laptop screen. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "Please sit." I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. The room felt too big, too empty. Alexander's gaze never left me. "You made it," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. "I wasn't sure if you'd show." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "I'm here," I replied, "and I'm ready to start." He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "I've seen a lot of potential in you, Sarah. You're not like the others." The others? The ones who had played the game for years, the ones who knew the rules. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I wasn't about to question it. "I'm not interested in games," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to work. I'm here to make a difference." Alexander smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." He pulled out a folder from the desk and pushed it toward me. "This is your first assignment. I need you to go through it, analyze the data, and find the patterns. We have an opportunity to invest in a tech startup, and I need someone who can think beyond the numbers. Someone who can see what others can't." I opened the folder and began scanning the papers inside. The data was overwhelming, filled with market trends, growth projections, and financial statements. But as I read through it, I realized something. This was exactly the kind of challenge I had been looking for. I wasn't just solving riddles anymore. I was solving real problems. "I can do this," I said, looking up from the papers. Alexander nodded, his eyes glinting with approval. "I know. You can," he said. "I'm counting on you, Sarah. Don't let me down." His words were simple, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a test. A test of everything I had ever believed about myself. I was no longer just a waitress. I was a player in a game much bigger than I had ever imagined. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to play. I sat in the sleek conference room at Anderson Capital, a large screen displaying financial data in front of me. My mind was a whirlwind of numbers, projections, and calculations. It had been a week since I had taken Alexander's offer, and the weight of my decision was sinking in deeper each day. The job wasn't what I had expected. I had thought I would be buried under endless paperwork, following the orders of high-powered executives. But instead, Alexander had handed me a challenge that made every other task pale in comparison. The startup opportunity one had been given was massive, with potential to revolutionize the tech industry. The data was overwhelming, but it was exactly what I had wanted, a chance to prove myself. I had spent every waking hour over the last few days analyzing the company's market position, financial health, and growth potential. What I had discovered was staggering. The company was sitting on a gold mine, but their growth strategy lacked the depth it needed to succeed in a competitive market. There was so much at stake, and I knew that this could either make or break my career here. As I worked, I could hear the buzz of activity outside the conference room. The company was filled with energy, but there was an underlying tension in the air. Alexander's vision was big, but so were the risks. I was starting to see just how much was riding on this investment. The door to the conference room opened, and Alexander walked in. He was dressed in his usual tailored suit, his expression unreadable. I stood up, feeling a rush of nerves. "Sarah," he said, his voice cool. "I've been following your progress. How are we looking?" I swallowed hard, then took a deep breath. "I think we're sitting on a gold mine, but we need a better strategy to make the most of it," I replied, my voice steady despite the nerves. Gnawing at me. "The company's growth potential is huge, but the team's current approach is too narrow. They're focused on short-term profits instead of sustainable growth. Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Go on, he said, gesturing for me to continue. We need to take a more aggressive approach in diversifying their investments, I said, pacing slightly as I spoke. They've already tapped into a niche market, but they're not capitalizing on the broader tech trends that are emerging. The company has the resources to expand, but they need a clear, long-term vision. I paused, making sure he was following my train of thought. I would recommend investing heavily in artificial intelligence and automation. Those are the industries that will drive growth over the next decade, and the company has the technical expertise to lead the charge. But they need to shift their focus and align their strategy with the future, not just the present. Alexander was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on me. I couldn't read his expression, and it made me uneasy. He was a master at controlling his emotions, and I wasn't sure if he was impressed or irritated. You've been thinking about this, he said finally, his voice neutral. You're not wrong. But there's one thing you need to understand. We don't just make decisions based on potential. We make decisions based on calculated risk. You have to be sure. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I understand. But this is the future, I said. And I'm confident that with the right strategy, we can take this company to new heights. We just need to act fast before the market shifts again. Alexander studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. I'm going to trust you on this, Sarah, he said, his voice calm, but with a hint of something else. But remember this, you're not just working for me. You're working for the future of this company. If you're wrong, it won't just be your career that's on the line. It'll be ours. My heart skipped a beat. I'm aware of the stakes, I said, my voice steady despite the pressure. But I believe in this, and I'm willing to put everything on the line to make it work. Alexander turned to face me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Good, he said, because that's what it's going to take. And if you're successful, you'll not only have proven yourself, you'll have changed the game for everyone here. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. This was it. This was the moment that would define my future. I had come this far, and there was no turning back. The risks were high, but the rewards were even higher. And for the first time, I truly believed that I was capable of handling them. As Alexander left the room, I stood there for a moment, taking in the gravity of the situation. I had been given a chance, a real chance, to make an impact. But I also knew that failure wasn't an option. The future of the company, my career, and everything I had worked for depended on the choices I made now. I arrived at the office early the next morning, determined to put everything I had into this project. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. I had spent the entire night going over the data, reworking the projections, and refining the strategy one had presented to Alexander. I wasn't just trying to impress him anymore. I was proving to myself that I could do this. I could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just about making money. It was about making a mark, something bigger than myself. As I sat down at my desk, I noticed the email that had just come through. It was from Alexander, and my heart skipped a beat as I opened it. Sarah, I need you to meet with the team this morning at 9. We'll be discussing your proposal in detail. Be prepared to answer any questions. My stomach churned. I knew this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. I wasn't just presenting to Alexander anymore. I was presenting to a room full of seasoned professionals, people who had been working in this industry for years. But there was no turning back now. I had to face them. The meeting room was already filled when I arrived, and I could feel the eyes on me as I walked in. I had never felt so out of place. They all looked so confident, dressed in their expensive suits, their eyes trained on their laptops as they reviewed the documents in front of them. And then there was me, in my modest black dress, my nerves almost getting the better of me. But I took a deep breath and stood tall. This was my moment. Alexander was sitting at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning over the papers in front of him. When he saw me, he gave me a small nod, and I took my seat. Let's begin, he said, his voice steady. Sarah, you've got the floor. I could feel my palms sweating as I stood up to present, but I didn't let it show. I had worked too hard to back down now. Good morning, everyone. I began, my voice steady despite the nerves. As you know, I've spent the last few days going over the data for this tech startup, and I've come up with a strategy that I believe will set us apart from the competition. I paused for a moment to gather my thoughts. making sure I had everyone's attention. The company has a great product, but their current approach to market penetration is flawed. They're targeting a niche that's already saturated. We need to expand their reach by diversifying into emerging tech sectors, specifically artificial intelligence and machine learning. I could feel the room quieting as they listened. I continued, outlining my strategy step by step, highlighting the key areas where I saw potential for growth. I spoke with confidence, knowing that this was my opportunity to prove myself. But as I looked around the room, I could see the skepticism in some of their eyes. They weren't convinced. Alexander's eyes never left me, though. His gaze was intense, almost as if he was trying to gauge how serious I was. Okay, one of the senior analysts said, leaning forward. Let's say we agree with your assessment of the company's potential. What's the catch? What's the risk here? I had been expecting this question. It wasn't going to be easy to convince them, and I had to be ready for everything. The risk is in the market shift, I replied, my voice calm but firm. The tech industry moves fast, and if we don't act quickly, we'll miss out. But that's also why we have to be strategic. We need to be ahead of the curve, not chasing it. There was a long silence as the analysts exchanged looks. I could see them weighing my words, considering the possibilities. You're asking us to shift focus completely, another voice chimed in. Are you sure the company can handle that kind of pivot? I nodded, my resolve hardening. Yes, I said firmly. They have the resources, the expertise, and the drive. They just need the right direction. This strategy will allow them to scale in a way that aligns with the future, not just the present. The room fell silent again, but this time, it felt different. The skepticism was fading, replaced by the quiet hum of consideration. Alexander spoke up then, his voice cutting through the silence. I agree with Sarah, he said, his tone decisive. We're not here to play it safe. If we want to lead, we need to take calculated risks. And this strategy, while ambitious, is exactly what we need. There was a pause before the senior analyst who had questioned me earlier spoke again. All right, I'm in. But we'll need to see a detailed roadmap with projections before we can move forward. I nodded, my heart pounding with relief. This was it. I had done it. The room seemed to come alive with a new energy, the wheels of change beginning to turn. Thank you, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I'll have the roadmap ready by this afternoon. As I sat back down, I felt a sense of accomplishment wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. It wasn't just about winning approval from the team. It was about proving to myself that I could do this. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was part of something bigger, something that had the power to change everything. I spent the next few days working relentlessly, creating the detailed roadmap that the team had asked for. Every meeting felt more intense than the last, each one pushing me further into a world I wasn't fully prepared for, but was learning to navigate. Alexander had made it clear that he was counting on me, and I couldn't afford to let him, or myself, down. The team was finally starting to come around to my vision. Every time I presented new projections or strategies, their skepticism seemed to dissipate, replaced with cautious optimism. But with every success came a new set of challenges. It wasn't long before we encountered the first major hurdle. A competitor, a much larger company, had announced a similar move into the artificial intelligence and automation sector. Their announcement sent shockwaves through the industry, and our investors became nervous. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I had put everything I had into this project, and now it felt like everything could come crashing down. The room was tense as we sat around the conference table, analyzing the competitor's announcement. The senior analysts were going over the numbers, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. Alexander stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the screen in front of him. What do we do now? One of the analysts asked, breaking the silence. We're not going to let this shake us, Alexander said, his voice firm. We're going to pivot, and we're going to do it fast. Sarah, what's our next move? All eyes were on me. The weight of their expectations was heavier than I had ever felt, but there was no turning back now. I stood up, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my chest. We need to double down on what sets us apart, I said, my voice steady. The competitor's move is predictable. They're following the same trends, the same market logic that's been in place for years. We need to take a more creative approach. Instead of just following the trends, we should be setting them. I could see the glint of interest in Alexander's eyes. He had always pushed me to think beyond the conventional, And now, it was time to deliver. I've been thinking about expanding our reach into uncharted territories, specifically using artificial intelligence to revolutionize the way we interact with our customers. Instead of just automating processes, we can create personalized experiences for each client, integrating real-time data and AI to make every interaction unique. The room was quiet as I spoke, everyone absorbing my words. I continued, laying out a plan for how we could leverage this strategy to not only compete with the larger company, but to pull ahead of them. We'll focus on creating a platform that offers more than just automation. We'll offer intelligence that can adapt to each user's needs, almost like having a personal assistant who understands them. I could see the gears turning in their minds. It was risky, but it was bold, and it was exactly the kind of challenge I had been waiting for. We'll need to move quickly, I said, looking around the room. If we want to implement this strategy before our competitor has the chance to catch up, we need to get started right away. Alexander nodded slowly, clearly impressed with my vision. I like it, he said, his tone decisive. We're going to make this happen. But even as the team began to rally behind the new plan, a lingering doubt stayed with me. The competitor was much bigger, with far more resources at their disposal. But as I looked around the room at the team that had come to respect my ideas, I knew that this was our chance. If we could pull this off, we wouldn't just be a step ahead of the competition, we would redefine the entire industry. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights, meetings, and strategy sessions. The pressure was immense, but I found myself thriving under it. The team was working harder than ever, pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible. And despite the risks, there was a sense of excitement in the air, a shared belief that we were on the verge of something truly groundbreaking. One evening, as I was walking out of the office, Alexander stopped me. "You've done great work, Sarah," he said, his voice genuine. "I knew you had it in you. This is just the beginning." I smiled, feeling a rush of pride. This was more than just a job now. It was a mission that I was fully committed to. And as I stepped out into the night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This was the moment everything was leading up to, the moment that would define my future. I arrived at the office early the next morning, feeling the weight of everything we had been working toward. The team had embraced the new strategy, and despite the risks, the excitement was palpable. But with each passing hour, I could feel the pressure mounting. We had already started building the new platform, the one that would revolutionize how we interacted with our clients. But we were racing against time. The competitor was already a step ahead, and the window to move quickly was narrowing. The only way to stay ahead was to be bold, but the stakes were higher than ever. As I sat in my office, the sound of the city outside filtering through the window, I found myself replaying the events of the past few weeks. I had always been a survivor, keeping my head down and working quietly, but now, I was in the spotlight, and the entire company was depending on me. I wasn't used to the pressure. I wasn't used to the constant scrutiny, the weight of every decision I made. But I had to keep going. I had to be strong. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Alexander. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to talk." I stood up, my pulse quickening. "What's going on?" "I've just been informed that our competitor is launching their product ahead of schedule," he said. "We have to make our move now." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected it, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill down my spine. "What's the plan?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "We accelerate the launch," Alexander said. "We push all our resources into finalizing the platform and make sure it's ready for the market. I'm counting on you, Sarah." His words were like a challenge, a test of my resolve. I couldn't back down now. I couldn't let everyone down. "I'll make it happen," I said, determination flooding through me. "We're not just going to match them, we're going to outdo them." "That's what I want to hear," he said, his voice steady. "Get it done." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. I had no choice but to dive in head first. The next few days were a blur of meetings, revisions, and late nights. The team was working around the clock, pushing their limits to get the platform ready. But even as the pressure mounted, I could feel something shifting inside me. I had been given a chance to prove that I wasn't just a waitress anymore, that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. And now, I had the power to make it happen. I stayed in the office for hours, working through the night, making adjustments to the platform, checking and rechecking every detail. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of the world, but I couldn't afford to second-guess myself. I had to trust the team, trust the work we had done, and trust that this was the right move. The following week, we were ready. The platform was complete, and it was everything we had hoped for. It was sleek, innovative, and, most importantly, ahead of the competition. I stood in the conference room with Alexander and the team, watching the demo. The technology was flawless, the user experience seamless. It was a game-changer. As the final touches were put into place, I felt a surge of pride. This was it. This was the moment we had been working for, and it felt like the beginning of something bigger. "Well done, Sarah," Alexander said, his voice filled with approval. "This is exactly what we needed. You've proven yourself." I smiled, but the reality of the situation hit me all at once. This was just the start. There would be more challenges ahead, more risks to take, and more obstacles to overcome. But I was ready. I had come too far to turn back now. The product launched a week later, and the response was overwhelming. The industry was buzzing, and within days, we had surpassed our competitor in terms of market interest and investor support. The risk had paid off. I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration, a feeling I had never experienced before. I was part of something that was changing the game. As the days passed, I began to understand what Alexander had seen in me. I wasn't just a waitress with a knack for solving problems. I was someone who could see the bigger picture, someone who could take risks and find solutions where others saw none. But even as the company celebrated its success, I knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much more to accomplish. And I wasn't about to stop now. I stood in the middle of the office, watching as the team celebrated the success of the launch. There was excitement in the air, people laughing, high-fiving, and congratulating each other. We had done it. The product was live, and it was exceeding every expectation. Investors were lining up, and the media attention was starting to roll in. It was a whirlwind, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel proud of what we had achieved. But, as the cheers died down, a small part of me remained unsettled. There was always another challenge, another hurdle waiting to be faced. This success was just a step, not the finish line. And I knew that the higher we climbed, the more we would have to lose. The next morning, as I walked into the office, Alexander was already at his desk, looking as composed as ever. His eyes met mine as I entered, and he nodded in acknowledgement. There was something about him that made me uneasy, not because of anything he had done, but because of the weight of responsibility that came with working alongside him. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I need to talk to you about the next phase." I nodded and walked over to his desk. "I'm ready," I replied, though I couldn't help but feel the tension building inside me. We had just launched our product, but I knew that Alexander was always thinking 2, 3 steps ahead. "The market is reacting well, but we can't rest on our laurels," he said, his gaze steady. "I want us to stay ahead of the curve. We need to start looking at the next big opportunity before anyone else does." I swallowed, knowing exactly where this was going. "What do you have in mind?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We're going to expand," he said simply. "We've tapped into one market, but we need to push into international waters. I want you to take charge of the global expansion strategy. Find the best regions, the most profitable markets. I trust your instincts." I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was big, really big. We were already dealing with a product launch that had exceeded expectations, and now we were talking about taking on the global market. "That's a huge responsibility," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure I'm the right person for this?" Alexander leaned forward, his expression unwavering. "I'm sure. You've proven yourself. This is the next step for you, for the company. And I need someone who's willing to take risks, someone who isn't afraid to make bold moves." I could feel the weight of his words, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. But then I remembered everything we had gone through to get to this point. Every late night, every decision that had led us here. I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'll do it," I said, my voice firm. "I won't let you down." Alexander gave me a rare smile, one that held a mix of approval and expectation. "I know you won't," he said, standing up. "This is going to be the real test. The next step in building something that lasts." He handed me a folder filled with information on potential markets for our expansion. "Start with this," he said. "Look over the data, and let's meet tomorrow to discuss the next steps." I took the folder, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was it, the real challenge. The one that would test everything I had learned, everything I had worked for. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. The next few weeks were a blur of research, analysis, and strategy. I worked tirelessly, diving into the numbers, looking at emerging markets, and identifying the best opportunities for expansion. It was exciting but overwhelming at the same time. Every decision felt like it had the potential to change the course of the company, and that kind of pressure wasn't something I was used to. As the days passed, I started to form a strategy. I focused on countries with rapidly growing tech sectors, regions that were primed for the kind of innovation we were offering. But as I worked, I realized something. We weren't just entering these markets to sell a product. We were entering them to change the game. This wasn't just about revenue or market share. It was about reshaping industries, pushing boundaries, and setting the stage for a future we had yet to fully imagine. As I presented my plan to Alexander and the team, I could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't a small move, it was a leap. But as I spoke, I saw something in Alexander's eyes. It was the same look he had given me when he first offered me the job, trust. And with that trust, I felt my confidence grow. This is exactly what we need, he said, his voice steady. We're not just going to enter these markets, we're going to dominate them. This is the next big step for us. I smiled, feeling a rush of adrenaline. We were on the edge of something incredible, and I was ready to jump in head first. This was my chance to truly prove myself, to show that I could lead the company into uncharted territory and come out on top. But I knew the journey wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and risks along the way. But for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and I was ready for whatever came next. I spent the next few weeks diving deep into the global expansion strategy, refining the plan, and making adjustments based on feedback from Alexander and the team. We were moving faster than I had anticipated, and the pressure was immense. But the more I worked on it, the clearer it became that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. I was no longer just trying to keep up with the pace of the company. I was setting the pace. As we finalized the details of the international launch, I found myself spending more and more time in meetings with key stakeholders and investors. It was exhilarating but exhausting. Each conversation felt like a delicate balancing act, trying to address concerns while maintaining the bold vision that had gotten us this far. But even as we prepared to launch, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The competitor, the one we had been racing against, was starting to move faster too. They had ramped up their marketing efforts and were pushing hard to establish their presence in the same markets we were targeting. My heart sank as I watched their progress. They had more resources, more connections, and a much larger team. We had a smaller, more agile operation, but the odds were stacked against us. The morning of the launch, I sat in the conference room with Alexander, the rest of the team, and a handful of investors. The room was filled with anticipation, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Everyone was waiting for the green light. Alexander stood at the front of the room, looking as calm and collected as always. He glanced around the table before speaking. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "The market is ready for us. We've spent months preparing, and now it's time to take that first step." I felt the weight of his words. It wasn't just about launching a product. It was about changing the game, about proving that we could outmaneuver a much larger competitor with nothing more than smart strategy and determination. Alexander turned to me. "Sarah," he said, his tone firm, "this is your moment. I'm trusting you to make this work." His trust in me weighed heavily. I had taken the reins, and now it was up to me to lead the charge. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked through the presentation on the screen, outlining our market entry plan, the steps we would take, and the resources we would allocate to ensure success. I outlined the key regions, the strategic partnerships, and the marketing blitz that would hit each market in a coordinated wave. But as I looked around the room, I saw more than just people waiting for a presentation. I saw the expectations of an entire company, a team that was looking to me for direction. The competitor had made their move, but we weren't going to sit back and let them take the lead. We had our own strategy, one that would leverage our agility and creativity to beat them at their own game. As the meeting wrapped up and the investors gave their nod of approval, I felt a rush of both excitement and dread. The next few months were going to be critical. There was no turning back now. The first phase of our international launch kicked off in Europe. It was a massive undertaking, and I found myself traveling between markets, meeting with local partners, overseeing marketing campaigns, and doing everything I could to ensure our strategy was being executed flawlessly. Each new market brought its own challenges, but it also brought fresh opportunities. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and I began to see the results of our work starting to pay off. We were ahead of the curve, and the competitor, while aggressive, was starting to lag behind. But just as things were starting to look up, disaster struck. A key partnership that we had been relying on fell through. The supplier we were working with in one of our major markets couldn't meet the demand we had anticipated. It was a massive blow. I could feel the tension in the air as the team scrambled to figure out how to resolve the issue. If we couldn't find an alternative, our momentum could be shattered, and we would lose everything we had worked for. I immediately took charge, reaching out to alternative suppliers and negotiating new contracts. The days felt like a blur, and I worked tirelessly to ensure that we wouldn't be derailed. I felt the weight of every decision, knowing that if I failed, it wouldn't just be my reputation on the line. It would be the future of the company. It wasn't easy, but after days of negotiations, we secured a new supplier who could meet our needs. The crisis was averted, and we were back on track. But I knew this was just the beginning. The competition was still fierce, and the market was changing every day. The challenges kept coming, but with every obstacle we faced, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident in my ability to lead. Alexander had put his trust in me, and I wasn't about to let him, or the team, down. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready for whatever came next. We were playing a long game now, and I was determined to win. I stood in the middle of the conference room, surrounded by the same faces that had once looked at me with skepticism. Now, as I presented the final figures from our international launch, I could see the respect in their eyes. We had done it. We had not only entered the global market, we had dominated it. The competitor, though large and well-funded, had failed to match our innovation and agility. Our strategy had worked, and now, the company was positioned to lead the industry. As I finished my presentation, I felt a rush of relief, but also a deep sense of pride. The journey had been long and full of obstacles, but every challenge had brought me closer to this moment. Alexander, who had been silent through most of the meeting, stood up and walked over to me. His eyes were no longer filled with the same intense scrutiny they had held when I first met him. Instead, there was a look of genuine admiration. "You've exceeded my expectations, Sarah," he said, his voice steady but warm. "You've not only proven yourself, you've changed the game." I could feel my chest swell with pride, but I kept my composure. "It was a team effort," I replied, looking around the room at the people who had worked alongside me every step of the way. "But yes, we've come a long way." Alexander nodded, his gaze turning thoughtful. "I knew you had potential the day I offered you this opportunity, but what you've done goes beyond what I imagined. You've shown leadership, vision, and the ability to execute under pressure." I could see the weight of his words settling in. This wasn't just praise, it was recognition of everything I had accomplished. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. But Alexander wasn't done. "I want you to understand something," he said, his tone more serious now. "You've earned your place here, Sarah. You're no longer just someone who proved herself in one project. You've earned your role as a leader in this company. I expect more from you moving forward." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always been the one to prove myself, always the one working tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure everything was perfect. But now, Alexander was telling me that I had not only proven myself, but had also earned the right to lead. It was a heavy responsibility, but for the first time, I felt ready to take it on. "I won't let you down," I said, my voice firm. Alexander gave me a small smile, one that conveyed both pride and expectation. "I know you won't," he replied. As the meeting concluded and the team filed out, I stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The pressure, the late nights, the constant struggle to keep moving forward, it had all led to this moment. But as I looked around the conference room, I realized that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to be done, so many new challenges to face, and so many more risks to take. I wasn't just a part of the company anymore. I was shaping its future. The road ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And with that sense of purpose and confidence, I walked out of the conference room, ready to tackle whatever came next.